This is the Press Play Podcast, brought to you by Real Resilience.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Press Play Podcast, brought to you by me, Ian Betson from Real Resilience. Many apologies, but it's been way too long since episode 14. I've still to find that secret 25th hour in the day to get everything done. If you ever find it, please be sure to let me know. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on this episode too. The best way is via the inquiry form on the Real Resilience website at realresilience.co.uk. As well as a conversation with my guest, in this episode I have news of machines for sale and even being given away for free, and a special announcement about a webinar I'll be running in January 2021. I would say that, newbie or old hand at OpenReel machines, you'll be bound to learn something new in this podcast as we welcome back Stuart Blacklock. He's a man with a wealth of reel-to-reel experience and, as you'll hear, a tape machine collection to match. I wanted to get him back on for a specific reason, prompted, as you'll hear, from a message I received on the website. So, straight to the interview. We start with a bit about Stuart and then move on from there. When we first spoke, way back, I think it was on episode 2, I can't remember now, time flies so, you were telling me about your phenomenal tape machine collection.
Certainly, yes. Well, I started off quite young at sort of like the age of 10. It wasn't until the age of 14, 15 that it started to take off with like 5 or 10 tape recorders. And I'm now up to around about 600 recorders. Since we last spoke, it is slowing right down. Space is the limiting factor. But the recorders range from domestic recorders from Philips, Grundig and such like and so forth, all the way up to the pros like Studas, Nagras and Stella boxes.
Well, I was having a look on your website, which is vintagerecorders.co.uk, and also I've seen your Facebook post as well. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get you back on was a post I had, and I'm always requesting that you're listening to the podcast. If you've got any ideas, please drop me a line. Probably the best idea is via the inquiry form on my website, realresilience.co.uk. And I had this great post, and I'm going to read it out actually. In entirety, and I'm not going to name the person, but they said, the average person in the UK or USA has no access to and cannot afford a Studer or Revox reel-to-reel machine. Your smug attitude about cheap consumer-grade half-inch reel-to-reel equipment and your decision not to offer repair irritates me no end. It's all I can afford. I'm done with your elitist podcast and will encourage others to turn off as well. I thought that was marvelous. If you look at my front end of my website, and I'm truly sorry for this, I do have a line here that unfortunately it happens, and I think lockdown has really increased this. Clearly, people have been up in their loft and found cheaper domestic grade machines from the 1960s that have been up there for probably 30 years or so and thinking, oh, I'd like to get this going. Well, I'd love to help, but I'm afraid when I say this is the kind of cost it's going to take, or I'm afraid I can't fix it, it's just I have to earn a living from fixing these machines. It's a greater part of my income, and I'm afraid I have to turn them away. Hence, this poster was saying perhaps about my smug attitude about cheap consumer grade machines. But what I wanted to get you on for, Stuart, because you've got such a breadth of experience from just look at your website, some of the more sort of, shall we say, affordable machines. I'd like to talk about, if you are getting into this great hobby, this great pastime, or you're using reel-to-reel machines for professional use, perhaps doing transfer of material or you're recording in a studio, I'd like to talk about entry-level machines, and I'd like to pick your brains about those. Tell me let's discuss it. How would we get into this business at an affordable level?
Well, firstly, just saying, just to sort of like the comments you mentioned there about the affordability and everything like that. I myself agree with totally what you say there, because there are a lot of machines out there which will take 3, 4, maybe 5 hours to get up and running, but nobody wants to pay to have them repaired. So it's very unfair when people turn around and sort of like, have a pop at people for that. They don't realize, they think, oh, maybe it just needs new belts and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, no, it's not that simple.
We are looking at machines that are, as I say to people, at the very least, they are 3 times past their projected lifespan of the manufacturer. Maybe they thought it would last 10 years. Well, the youngest machines are 30 years old now, and we go back to some of these consumer grade machines, as I call them. They're 50 and 60 years old, and they've got a multitude of problems with them, haven't they? As soon as you say, they're not just a case of a few belts and off you go.
For me, for starting off as a sort of like a basic sort of machine, thinking along the lines of something that won't need a lot of maintenance, something that's easy to repair, the humble little Akai 4000s, very cheap. They were very cheap when they came out. They were about £70 when they were new. And you can quite often pick them up off the bay and stuff like that for reasonable amounts of money. And they have, apart from crackly pots, which you can clean with a bit of contact cleaner, they tend to work straight off the bat. The belts don't turn gooey. There's no problem with pinch roller issues. If you're very unlucky, you might have a cam problem, which is caused by crystallization of the pot metal inside. But that tends to be older machines. So, I mean, for somebody who was starting on machines and they didn't know where they were getting into, and they didn't know or have the experience to repair them themselves, or wanted something simple to fix, Akai's tend to be a good starter point, especially the sort of like cheaper Akai 4000s. And then you've got your 4000, your 4000D, your 4000 GX, or the GX 4000D with the glass heads. All three machines, they're very good sounding machines. They haven't got a lot of headroom to them, but so long as you play within the boundaries of your scope of the sound levels and stuff like that, you don't drive it too much into the red, you tend to get a very good sound production out of them. They're quite understated machine, in my opinion.
I've had a couple of GX77s in recently, and I was quite impressed with those in terms of they're hi-fi looking. They could look nice in a hi-fi stack. I did find that the headroom, as you rightly say, isn't that great, and they were a little bit picky on the types of tape. And I wondered if the bias oscillators aren't man enough to drive some of the, I'll say, more modern tapes, but perhaps tapes that are designed for professional machines. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the GX77 is a machine I wouldn't recommend to a first timer. Because it's got that lovely head system in the middle of the machine, 6 head system, auto reverse, 3 motor. It sounds like it's got everything, but the only downside with the machine is that it hasn't got enough torque to rewind properly or fast forward. So if you're rewinding and the left hand reel is almost full and the right hand reel is almost empty, it tends to be very sluggishly slow because of the design of the head loop system. And there is modifications out there to actually get over this. But to do it properly, you have to sort of like basically replace all the tape guides and stuff like that, which are obviously no longer available. But I mean, as a machine, as a playing machine, when it's playing, it's absolutely beautiful.
No, they're lovely to look at. But as you say, the torque on them, my experience as well is they usually need a clean because of the lube and the oil and the grease has gone solid on it, and it's such a there's a lot of mechanics going on inside those machines, and the chances of you getting one that is completely smooth in its transport straight off the bat is very remote. But they are, they're nice machines to look at. Okay, so GX77, you say, yeah, nice, but might have a little bit of a torque issue. Anything else you think on those lines? Sort of affordable, not too big, not too flashy?
So, I mean, both those machines are 7-inch machines. If you were looking at 10.5-inch machines, which people quite like the looks of because obviously the bigger reels and such like, you've got your Revox A77, which would be more sound quality than looks. You probably know which machine I'm talking about. It's got a very 70s look to it. It's quite basic. You've just got your general functions and stuff like that. But it does exactly what it says on the tin, and it sounds very good. And that tends to have a little bit more in the way of headroom because it does share some fundamentals of the Studer machines in there. It doesn't have the same things, but shares some of its fundamentals.
Obviously, it's got the Revox cachet about it, and I can see why people do go for those because there's so many around and there's lots of parts that are readily available for them. I mean, with the A77, they did 5 variations, I think, a Mark 1 to Mark 4, and then there's a Dolby version, Dolby noise reduction version. Any particular one you would recommend out of those?
So the Mark 4, that's the one with the chrome dials with the insert, sort of like Battleship Grey control knobs, isn't it?
It's got a silver front on it, yeah.
I don't think the 4 has a silver, does it? The 2 and the 1 have silver.
I stand corrected. Maybe I'll have to have a quick wed check for them.
Definitely the later machine, because the Mark 1s and Mark 2s, the Mark 1 has a like a chrome flip down cover. They all got the front down clip down cover across the heads, where the later models have a brushed aluminium, where the Mark 1s and the Mark 2s possibly have a plastic chrome thing which bubbles and looks absolutely awful. And as far as I'm aware, that's the silver fronted one. I don't think the early ones came in Dolby, but like you say, the later ones did. I have to say I don't really use Dolby, never really saw the point of it, because I always felt it kind of knocked off the top end a little bit too much for me. So messed around with a few of them, Dolby ABC, and I'm looking in front of me here with the Studio, which has got the Dolby SR-A. I tend not to use that, so I would have gone for a Mark IV 2-track, and if you're very lucky, these tend to fetch the big money, but if you can get the high-speed ones, that's obviously the ones to go for.
What do you mean by high speed?
You had the HS, NS, LS, so high speed, normal speed, low speed. Low speed was 1 7/8, 3 3/4, and it was designed for speech. The 3 3/4, 7.5 was the normal speed one, which basically everybody used, and they sound very good. But if you wanted a bit of extra oomph in the response, you went for the high speed, which is 7.5 and 15. It was quite unusual to find that in the A77s, and more frequently found in the B77s, which is basically the natural progression of the A77.
What are your thoughts? You mentioned about the Dolby, and my experience is I did have a Dolby A77 in a few months ago. It played back perfectly, but on one channel it had a horrible warbling, I don't know what it was, distortion type sound on it. And of course, the Dolby circuits, they're all discrete components on there, aren't they, rather than some sort of multi-legged chip. What are your thoughts on noise reduction? You said you're not a great fan of it.
Well, I'm not particularly too worried about the low-end hiss. Most of the machines, the hiss levels are quite low, especially if you're listening to something quite loud. I mean, if you're listening to sort of like a soft classical piece, then yeah, you're going to notice the hiss. If you're listening to something a little bit more sort of modern or stuff like that, you're not really going to notice it. It kind of fades in the background, but it also makes the characteristics of the machine. The Dolby, I've tried the, like I say, A, B, C, and SR. The only one that I have used that I do like, which is not an infringement on the sort of like noise reduction, is the HX Pro. So I believe the 807, 810, 812, 816, and the 820 all have it built in, along with some other machines like the Otari MX55. And basically, it fiddles around with the bias, I believe, which increases the higher end frequency response when recording. For example, I was messing around with my A820 at 3.25 inches a second, and I managed to get frequency response from, I think it was around about the 30 hertz all the way up to 18 kilohertz at 3 3/4 on a machine capable of running at 30 inches a second.
We are talking about an A820 here, of course. There's a stratospherically higher than perhaps the A77s and the other GX400s that we've been talking about. But
definitely, yes,
yeah. But I do take on board what you say. If you are listening, it depends on kind of material you're listening on. You want to listen on, really, as you say. If you're listening to classical pieces, quiet pieces, you might be affected by the tape hiss. Again, it depends how loud you listen at as well. I mean, even an A77 or some of the GX400s, the signal to noise ratio between the difference between the wanted sound and the tape hiss is still enough for most people. So, really, these noise reduction systems, perhaps we shouldn't get too hung up about them, really. If it's got it, it's got it. If it hasn't, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my approach. I mean, like I say, I have got a number of machines with them on them, and I've collected them because, to be honest with you, just extra switches, which makes it look more pretty. So it's sort of like Phonographs and the Revoxes and stuff like that with the Dolby on there. It just makes it look a lot more impressive. But 9 times out of 10, I've just never used it.
And of course, the other thing is, if you're a player of pre-recorded tapes, invariably they weren't recorded with noise reduction on them, were they?
There was a very, very, very few selected tapes that were ever recorded with Dolby noise reduction. So yeah, most of them were recorded in just standard format. I mean, obviously the positive side of that is it's pre-recorded. It's all been done in the duplication rooms and stuff like that. So it's all been recorded as best as possible. But as I say that, I do believe that they started to reduce the speed and changed stereo 2 tracks into 4 tracks, and basically as the tapes got later on in life, they started to suffer in sound quality. But I think that was just basically trying to keep an expensive format cheap, to make it a rival to much cheaper formats like records.
Press Play, the Real Resilience Podcast.
Finishing part 1 of my conversation with Stuart about pre-recorded tapes leads me nicely into a plug for the next episode of Press Play. As it's at the end of the year, I'm going to give you a bumper reel of tape recorder listening. Episode 16 will see me in conversation with Andrew Morton of Parlogram Auctions about the Beatles on tape. Andrew has an encyclopedic knowledge of anything Beatles and has collected all of the studio albums of the band on original open reel tape. It's a fascinating listen, so please download it when it's released. At Real Resilience HQ, we have seen a stream of OpenReal patients, both through the door and during on-site visits. TIACs and Tascams are popular, the X1000, the X10, 32s, 34s, as well as Akai GX77s and GX4000s. Plus we see A and B77s from Revox. I'm selling machines too. Please take a look at the realresilience.co.uk website. Under the Shop tab is a tab marked Machines for Sale, so please take a look. To add to those already on the site, I'll be putting a restored 4-track A77 up for sale in the new year too. When you wish to give your machine some TLC, please drop me a line via the inquiry form on the site. I'll be happy to talk.
Find the Press Play podcast on SoundCloud and our YouTube channel. Just search for Real Resilience.
Now, exciting news of a webinar I'll be running on Saturday the 23rd of January 2021 on how to carry out an audio lineup of your machine. We'll cover the principles, the tools and the methods I use to do this, and I'll pass on some tips too. It will be 90 minutes long to do the subject justice, and it's at 1500, that's 3 p.m. UK time or UTC. There will be a small charge of £5 UK, that equates to about €550, 650 American dollars or $9 Australian dollars to cover my costs, but that's it. Tickets can be purchased from Eventbrite at the following address: eventbrite.co.uk, that's eventbrite.co.uk, and once you get onto the homepage of the site, search for OpenReal Tape Machine Lineup Webinar. That's OpenReal Tape Machine Lineup Webinar. And I'll also make some documents for download on my website to accompany the webinar. I'm aware this podcast gets all over the world, so I thought long and hard about the best day and time for it, so I hope that time works for you. So that date again, Saturday the 23rd of January 2021 at 1500 UTC on how to carry out an audio lineup of your tape machine. I really look forward to you joining me. So let's get back to part 2 of my conversation with my guest Stuart Blacklock on his thoughts on great entry-level tape recorders. Let's start with some Japanese machines. Tascam, TIAC, what are your thoughts on those entry-level machines that are like the 32 or an X10 or X1000? What's your thoughts there?
Well, Tascam, TIAC being both the same company, Tascam being their professional name, TIAC being the domestic name, I absolutely love them. I have got a slew of TIAC machines. Can't put a finger on the oldest one I've got. I think the oldest one I've got is probably something like an A3320, I think. So like 70s. I haven't got anything earlier, although I do know that there are a couple of valve machines that I'd love to get my hands on. But the X1000R and X2000R, I personally think are some of the finest domestic tape recorders you can possibly buy.
I think it was the X1000 that appeared in the scene of Pulp Fiction when it's an X1000, if I remember. Yeah,
it wasn't. Yeah, I know that scene. Yeah, no, it wasn't X2000.
It was an X2. It was an X2000.
An X2000 with Scotch reels on it rather than the black anodized Akai ones. Oh, what's that?
You've been watching too much Pulp Fiction. Oh, it was X2000. Well, I say I stand to be corrected there.
I remember seeing it in the film, and I thought, I want that. I really want that. And it took me a long time to find one, and eventually I imported one from America, and since then I've had about 7 or 8 more machines. I mean, that probably drives my passion about the machine, the fact that I think it's one of the best machines. Everybody's obviously got their own tastes, what they prefer in machines. Some people will say Akai's, like the GX747, will sound better. Personally, I mean, I've got that machine as well. I prefer the TIAC. And the X1000 it's got a few things that the 2000 hasn't got. I think the heads are different. The heads on the 2000 are slightly harder, but it's still got that computerized control, the accurate tape counter, the unusual feature where if you press return to 0 on the counter, the machine goes off rewinding, and as soon as it gets to within a minute of the tape counter, the tape slows down. And it's sort of like you can see there's a lot of computer control going on in the background of the machine. The X1000 being the first machine they sort of like introduced those kind of electronics into. And it's one of those recorders which, again, is definitely not a first-time buy machine, because as beautiful as it looks, you've got your belt problems.
I was going to mention that you mentioned earlier about the Akai doesn't suffer from gloopy belts, but my experience of the TIACs and Tascams is that they do. And would you echo that?
definitely. But the closed loop machines like the X series also have another issue, which is the pinch rollers go hard. And when the pinch rollers go hard on the machine, once you replace the belt, some people are experiencing when they press play, the tape starts to loop away from the heads and sort of like pulls in between the two pinch rollers because they're not turning at the correct speed. And there's a very finite adjustment you need to do on them, the pressure on the pinch rollers, but you also, ideally, when you do the belt, you need to replace the pinch rollers as well on those machines.
You get a lot of machines say, it does everything, but it doesn't play. Well, likelihood that the main drive belt to the capstan or the capstan of the flywheel is just gone all gloopy, and that is a problem I find, is cleaning that out. I have seen some that literally it's deposited itself right the way around the inside of the machine where it's been spinning and then flies off and then just goes to gloop all over the machine. And that is quite a cleaning up job. The other thing that I have not experienced but read about is the motors on Tascams. They're DC motors, and they're prone to failure or impossible to get hold of. Is that something that you experienced?
Yes, that's becoming more and more apparent. There was a company in China that was selling them brand new at about £130 a piece. And somebody asked me the very same question, and I went to have a look, and they're all gone. They start off with a clicking sound, and you can hear them when you press play. You can hear like a clicking coming from the motors. The brushes go inside the motors, and you can repair that. It's definitely not a first-time job. On the capstan controller, there's a small PCB, which from memory, it's pretty simple. You've got a plus VE input. You've got a switch that tells it to turn on the capstan. I think there's another one which tells it the direction it needs to spin for the auto reverse machines, and another one that tells it what speed it's running at, of which there's two different speeds. The speed adjustment's done on that PCB. I've had those boards fail a few times, and luckily the components on those boards are not too bad. But what can happen is sometimes they can fail, cause the motors to go off at a rate of knots, flat out, and burn themselves out. I've been lucky as to every time I've had a dodgy motor, I've been able to repair them, but it's not easy.
Those TACs we've been talking about and Tascams are all sort of 1980s machines. How about the sort of 1970s, the sort of A2300s, 3300s? What's your opinion on those?
So this is a bit crazy, this, because the earlier machines used, I've forgotten the word now, not servo motors. Simpler, no, it's I've forgotten the name for the two-phase motors that they used in them. I cannot remember the name of them now. So basically, Revox always used PAPS motors, very robust, and there's no carbon brushes in them. It uses two phases of alternating currents, 90 degrees out of phase of each other to make them rotate. And I just cannot remember the name of what the motor's called now. It's on the tip of my tongue. But yes, the earlier TACs had these motors, and they were rock solid. You didn't get any clicking, and there was very little to wear out. You may come across noisy bearings, but it was unusual. As you've mentioned, the belts were always a typical sticking point. And the other issue that you had, which also the TACs, the later ones, suffered, was a lot of the mechanical moving parts, such as the pinch roller, tape guides and such like. The grease would go hard on them, and you wouldn't be able to engage the machine. So the earlier ones, they were simpler, but there was quite a trick and a knack to getting them apart without breaking parts off, to clean the parts up and properly lubricate the machine to be able to use it again.
And German makes and or European makes? How about Grundigs and Tandbergs? What's your thoughts on those as an entry level machine?
That's a good one, that one, because I've got the Grundigs and the Tandberg's latest machines, and I've got some of the very early machines. I got Model 1 Tandberg. I did have things like the TK1, which was the Tandberg Cub little portable thing. Sorry, it was a Grundig thing. They're very overshadowed because they tended to use the 8-pin DIN format, which is a lower voltage than phono. So some people may experience is that, for example, they'll get a professional machine, they'll plug it into an amplifier, and it might not sound great. Well, that's because XLRs, I think it's 10 dBs on the XLR and it's 4 dBs on the phono. I can't remember the numbers exactly.
There's a 10-14 dB difference between phono and XLR. Obviously, XLR being the professional level and balanced. You're looking at a higher audio level, but as you say, DIN is even lower than phono level.
So you get these people plug these machines into their hi-fi, and they don't sound great because they sound distorted because they're overdriving them. So, for example, the Philips N4450, that was one of my first 10.5-inch machines. And when I plugged it in first and I tried recording something, I thought, this just sounds absolutely dreadful. And then I found out that obviously DIN is a lower voltage format than phono. So that kind of, unfortunately, not a lot of people understand that one. And when they try them, they don't sound that good. And then couple that with, there's not very many in the way of upright machines and pretty machines from the Tandberg and Grundig range. Grundig-wise, you've got the TS945, which took unusual 9-inch reels. And then you had the TS1000, which was incredibly problematic in my view. I've got about 7 or 8 of those. None of them work. I just haven't sat down to fix them yet, but it's mostly logic issues. And then you've got your Tandberg, which they had a few later ones, but I've had people tell me the Tandberg TD20A is one of the finest machines I ever heard. It's like, I've listened to it and I thought, no.
One of the things I'm finding, actually, with the I touched on this earlier about the design lifespan of these machines, is, and I found this with the Philips and also with the Grundig, there's a lot of plastic parts in those machines, and I had a Grundig 945 that literally all of the main cogs inside it just disintegrated. It looked like crystallized sugar in the bottom of the machine, and all of the teeth had just come off the cog in the center. And I've also had a Philips where the plastic on it is just disintegrating, whether it's been stored in less than ideal circumstances, maybe up in somebody's loft or in a hot boiler room or something like that. But plastic parts, these are starting to crumble as well on sort of 14, 50-year-old machines. Is that what you're finding?
I think the Philips you're referring to is the N7300, and
Yep.
it shares a very common similarity with the Grundig TS945. Both of them have pinch rollers, which are moved out of the way to make easier tape loading. When you press play, the pinch roller raises and then goes towards the capstan. The Sony TC377, the 399 did the same thing. But this giant cog, there was a lot of strain on it because it wouldn't just move the pinch roller, it would take the brakes off. And I think it did something to the tension arms. I can't remember 100% on that. But like you say...
One I had, the tension arms were just literally, the bits of them were falling apart. With most tape machines, if you pick them up, brace yourself, keep your back straight and lift. That Philips, you could lift it up on one hand. It's the lightest machine going because it's all made of plastic.
Yes. Yes, it's unbelievably light. It just feels horrible to sort of like just pick one up. I did have 2 of them, which are sort of like, I did get rid of them pretty quick. I was fortunate because one of them still had a good drive mechanism in it. So the guy who had it off me was over the moon with that. And one of them was starting to fall apart. It seems to be, I'm not sure if it's the plastics deteriorating or whether or not it's the force presented on them is causing them to fracture. I mean, I haven't as of yet taken apart the TS945 far enough to see that mechanism. I mean, the one that I had, which as far as I'm aware is still working, I haven't touched it in about 5 years. That one had just an electronics issue, and that's worked as far as I know ever since. But now you've got me worried now. You're never going to plug it in, it's just going to fall apart.
It happens. I mean, it's a real shame, you know. Sometimes, as I say to people, the patient dies on the table, and this 945, those cogs are buried inside the main mech of the machine. You could just see the teeth of it were just turning, as I said, to like granulated sugar, dropping off them. And the only way to get this machine up and running again is a complete mech. Even if you could get the cogs for it, taking the whole thing apart and getting all that lot lined up inside and working again, it's just beyond economic repair. It's a great shame, but I had to say to the owner, I'm sorry, this machine has finally reached the end of the road. And as you say, whether it's the strain on the plastic parts or whether the plastic parts are aging, or indeed we don't know the way these machines have been stored. As I said, it could have been left in a loft or in a hot boiler room, which has been less than kind to the plastic.
I haven't really had a look at the TS945, but this 7300, this may not apply to, because I can't remember any kind of hard grease in there. But one of the other machines you mentioned earlier, the Akai GX77, you mentioned the complex mechanism in the middle. That I have found that even if it works, you need to take it apart. You need to take that mechanism out and clean it and re-grease it, because although it's working, it is definitely under too much strain, because I've seen them work and then it just shred the teeth off it. And it's because the grease has gone so hard that the motors are fighting it so much that it just shreds the cogs off. So you tend to find that possibility of prevention's better than the cure, as it were, you'd probably get a machine like that without even testing it. You'd strip it apart and clean the cogs and clean the grease off and replace it with new.
Moving up a little bit further, we did touch on Revoxes, but Technics, they've got a great cachet with the beautiful looking frontage of these machines. I'm thinking of the 1500, the 1700. And your thoughts on those? They are getting a little, I wouldn't say they're entry level machines, but perhaps if you can stretch to them, what are your thoughts on those?
They are a beautiful machine. I've got a number of them, 15s and 17s, and the uniqueness of the ISO loop system does give it that sort of like that unusual look. I mean, generally, not very many tape recorders have that feature. 3M have them. There was actually a machine predating 3M by Lever's Rich called the Q series, which had the ISO loop system. But it's such a unique feature, which I think is what attracts a lot of people, because it looks stunning, it looks timeless, and the most important thing is it sounds great, and it covers the three most important speeds: 3 3/4, 7.5, and 15 IPS. And there is the 1520, which was designed to be a semi-serious tape recorder with balanced XLRs on the back, and then you have the very elusive 1800, which I believe was also balanced inputs and outputs. Personally, I really like the sounds of them, but there is one big gripe with them that I'm seeing personally myself, and I'm hearing more and more, is that the capacitors on those machines are failing. And one of the things I've noticed is that the first one I ever picked up, the guy said to me, "Oh yeah, it's all fully working and everything like that." And I turned it on, laced the tape up, and the first thing I noticed is that there's a little LED which shines on the tape counter roller. And when I press play, I noticed that the pattern, the strobe effect, was bouncing forwards and backwards. And then when the sound came on, you could obviously hear incredibly high levels of flutter. And what it turned out to be was the very large capstan motor inside the machine was hunting. It wasn't locking onto a proper speed. I was able to fix it because there is actually a simple adjustment to get around that. But the next time I tried it, it was doing it again. And so reading a little bit further in, they tend to need quite a few capacitors replaced on them to make them sing like they used to do. Whether or not you can get away with just doing the servo controller board, or whether or not you have to do the electronics, I personally had no problems with the audio side of things or any kind of logic failings. The other issue I have discovered, and I think this is also a common one with the Technics, is that the brakes don't work. So when you press stop, the tape uses reverse braking like on a lot of the bigger machines. But then when the tape comes to rest, the tape stops. And what should happen is the brakes come on to stop the tapes from falling off. And basically it doesn't happen. So the reel can continue on moving and the tape unspools itself. And basically it puts itself into a shutdown system. And then you've got to tighten it back up again. So it is a fantastic machine and it sounds brilliant, but it can require quite a lot of work to get it working.
That's good advice from someone who knows, with your massive collection of tape machines. And as you can tell from listening to Stuart, the huge experience he has. Put you on the spot here now, Stuart. You've got a limited budget, perhaps, I don't know, £250, up to say £500, $500. We've touched on a few machines. What would we be looking for to get into this hobby at that kind of budget? What kind of machines would you go for, and what kind of things should you look out for that might be wrong with them when you do make that jump and buy?
We're at the 500 marker. If we're basing this on that we're looking for good sound quality, personally, my first port of call would be a B77, Revox B77, because it is the natural progression of the A77. The sound quality is there and everything like that. It's more about sound quality than looks, although the machine does look stunning. For that kind of money, you should be able to pick yourself up a decent one, and 9 times out of 10, they're rock solid. They tend not to need a lot of work. Especially for that price, you should find them already done with belts and stuff like that. On the Japanese market, for around about the 500 marker, I'm just having a quick think, you'd probably looking at, if you were patient enough, you may see something like a GX635 come around. TAC-wise, you probably see the older A series, or you probably see the TAC X10 series, X10R series. The X10 and X10R series tend to share the same heads and audio as the X1000, just don't share the same kind of computerized and isn't that beautiful brushed aluminium black or silver finish. It's more of a just painted matte grayish face. But it all depends. If you're looking for something, with a lot of bells and whistles and flashing lights and stuff like that, then you tend to find your Akai's tend to have more of those kind of features. Like you mentioned before, the GX77, you probably get one of those in very good condition working, and possibly with the tension mod for that kind of price. you tend to find them go for a little bit higher if they put all that hard work into it, because it is generally not a straightforward task to get them to sort of like work like they used to do.
I forgot to mention the other one you said about the GX77, the Pioneer, which is the lovely little Pioneer with all the blue meters below it.
So that would be the bigger Pioneer. There's two Pioneers that people go for the RT707, which has the VU meters in the center, and then the RT909 with the VU meters at the bottom of the machine, and they're the blue vacuum fluorescent display. Have noticed, though, that they're starting to fetch quite a premium, those machines. They're similar issues as the TIAC, where they've got a belt that goes gooey, pinch rollers, which go gooey as well. You tend to have to replace both of them. And the other thing is that when you open up an RT909, you want to be very careful, because on the back of the capstan drives, there's two little ball bearings in the capstan. If you drop those and lose those, that's it. You're not going to get the machine running again, type thing. But the RT707 is definitely one that's a lot easier to get hold of, and it has an advantage of that is a direct drive system rather than a belt drive system. So there's no belts to go wrong. 9 times out of 10, electronically wise, they are pretty solid. They are auto reverse, but they only record in one direction. The only thing I would say was problematic about the Pioneer RT707, which is cosmetic, is the reel hubs are made out of some sort of alloy which bubbles and blisters quite easy with age. Other than that, it's generally a good machine. The heads seem to last forever. As far as I was aware, they weren't expensive machines when they came out, but they tend to be around about that marker, and with the very fancy brushed aluminium finish with the large meters in the middle and stuff like that, they are quite sought after as well.
Yeah, they're attractive looking machines. Stuart, thank you very, very much for that. It's given us a good insight into sort of first step machines before we move up into the real bigger stuff. Perhaps we could chat in a few podcast time about the higher end machines if we're really getting into those. Would you be up for that?
Yes, definitely. It'd be very interesting.
Yeah, we can start talking some of the big Studers, and if you've got a few more bob to spend there. But in the meantime, Stuart, thank you very, very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I hope to welcome you on the podcast again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Take it easy for now. Goodbye.
Press.
Stuart's website can be found at vintagerecorders.co.uk, and it's an echo of his massive knowledge on the subject. That's it for this episode of the Press Play podcast from Real Resilience. Don't forget our next episode about the Beatles on tape with Beatles authority Andrew Morton, and of course the 90-minute webinar on lining up the audio on your machine. That will be at 1500 UTC on Saturday the 23rd of January 2021. Tickets are £5 UK, that's about 5.5 euros, $6.50 American dollars or $9 Australian dollars, and can be purchased at eventbrite.co.uk. That's eventbrite.co.uk. Search for OpenReel Tape Machine lineup.
Find Real Resilience on the web at realresilience.co.uk and on our Facebook page, Real Resilience.
Akai to Ampex, TIAC to Tandberg, Sony to Stellavox. Whatever badge it's got, it's what it does that's important. Uses tape to make a sound. So until the next time, keep it real.